Now joining us here in the studio is Michael Shifter. He's directed the Latin American and Caribbean program at the National Endowment for Democracy and currently serves as the president of the Inter-American Dialogue, a U.S. think tank on issues in Western Hemisphere affairs. Also with us, PJ Crowley. He's a professor at the George Washington University's Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication and a former U.S. Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs in the Obama administration. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Pleasure.
PJ, let me start with you. The president, as we know, has come in for a lot of criticism on his foreign policy. Charles Krauthammer, a columnist in the Washington Post, admittedly not a friend of this president, put it this way. He said the president has failed to get a trade agreement with Japan. Secretary of State John Kerry's Middle East peace efforts have collapsed. 2 conferences on Syria have got nowhere. And then we have what the writer calls American helplessness in the face of Russian aggression in Ukraine. Is that a fair assessment?
No, but it's a little bit like play-by-play, pick your favorite sport, basketball, cricket, whatever the case may be, and the picture in the middle of the game is not necessarily the picture that you'll see at the end of the game. Look, the president is doing several things. This is arguably one of the most complex periods of time for foreign policy in recent history. There's no question the United States is going through, from a period of maximalism, to a period of retrenchment. An excellent book by, Steve Sestanovich on that subject. But Steve makes the point that even presidents who have gone through these same periods can, in fact, achieve great things, from Dwight Eisenhower, to Richard Nixon, clearly, significantly his opening in the relationship between the United States and China. And what the president's also trying to do is unwind wars. He's doing that, obviously, as we've just talked about. That is exactly what he was elected to do. And he's trying to take the military instrument and put it back in balance so that as you're trying to resolve these difficult issues, whether it's Ukraine, Syria, the broader issue of the Middle East, or getting into a constructive relationship with the Asia-Pacific region, he's putting the economic interest foremost, replacing military action with diplomacy. And this is a difficult long-term process. I think these are appropriate instruments, but they obviously take time to resolve.
Okay, Michael Shifter, we heard PJ Crowley there defending the president, but does this look like a president who is in charge? Because I think a lot of this criticism stems from the fact that when it came to Syria, he drew a red line, and then he walked away from it. And It was seen as being weak. It was seen as being indecisive.
Well, that wasn't the issue that was managed most effectively. He may have ended up in the right place, but clearly it didn't give a very reassuring impression. Look, I think the problem with President Obama is that he set very high expectations, and he set the bar very high. And he's discovered that the world is complex, it's difficult, and this has been a sobering period for him. And now you're hearing his reflections on his own performance in foreign policy and understanding that there are enormous obstacles and difficulties. I think Syria is a real problem. I think the management of Egypt is a real problem. I think there are other issues where I think he's done pretty well. I think Iran issue, there are talks going on in Iran. I think that's a positive development. So I think one has to be a little bit. You can pick your issues and to make your argument. But I think if one does a fair, objective assessment overall, I think there are some things that are looking pretty good and others that aren't. But I think the problem overall, the impression is that he sort of thought it would be easy, or gave the impression that he was really going to be a transformative president in foreign policy, and I think the reality has hit very, very hard.
Well, I agree with Michael in that even the correct policies, the management of those policies, is very difficult. I mean, this is a transformative time. I mean, and pick your year as to, is this like 1989? Is it like the interwar period between World War I and World War II? Is it back in the 19th century? And so you have more things on your plate than you ever imagined possible. I think from a U.S. policy standpoint, we always understood and have said that the situation in the Middle East, for example, is unsustainable. But no one would have anticipated in January of 2011, in the response to the actions of a fruit vendor in Tunisia, that you would see this sweep in one direction and now this retrenchment back. And dealing with these issues, very, very complex.
Is the president, PJ, in sync with the views of the American people? There was a Pew poll that's just come out which finds that half of those polls support more sanctions against Russia, but only a third support supplying weapons to Ukraine, and only 4 in 10 actually believe his approach is right. So is the American people saying, we really do not want to get involved in other people's problems right now?
Yes, without question. There's no, back to the situation last fall, with Syria. The president, did redeem the red line, not necessarily in the best way possible, but it's arguable he would not have received if this had been put to an actual vote. He clearly would not have gained support in the House, and perhaps would not have gained support in the Senate. I think part of what the United States is trying to do is also push the responsibility back on individual countries or regions. What do you want to do, and then how can the United States, be supportive? That was the critique in Iraq, for example. Why have you gone and done this? And you do see a contrast between the regional approach to Libya. There was a UN Security Council resolution authorizing all necessary means to protect the Libyan people. There was an Arab League statement calling for intervention, and then there were willing partners in the region who were willing to put their own forces into play, Qatar and the UAE.
Right.
None of those conditions exist in the context of Syria, and yet the United States is being blamed at the same time for doing too much and not doing enough.
Michael, let's look at Latin America. You've done a great deal of work in Latin America, and I want to read for you something that was published in a report, and this report came out from the Council on Foreign Relations. It said, Latin America has never mattered more to the United States. It says the era of the United States as the dominant influence in Latin America is over. Countries in the region have not only grown stronger, but have expanded relations with others, including China and India. That was published in 2008.
Well, I think we could go back even further. This has been a long-term trend. I think there's a lot of people saying about how Latin America has become more global, more independent, more assertive, confident on the global stage. But you can go back even earlier than that and see this trend. What's happened, it's accelerated. Latin America's had a very good decade. High growth, a reduction in poverty, reduction in inequality. For the most part, there's obviously a lot of different countries that one has to qualify, but in general, it's been very, very positive. And the United States has had a very tough decade. 2 draining wars, the financial crisis in 2008, political polarization and gridlock here in Washington, really tough times in getting things done and getting things accomplished. And so that has implications for the traditional relationship. It's obviously changed in fundamental ways. The question is whether whether the United States has been capable of sort of shifting and adjusting from this role of being the hegemon in the Western Hemisphere, really driving the agenda, defining the agenda on the one hand, and disengaging and being indifferent on the other. And obviously it's been, as we've been discussing all of these issues, as PJ's been listing all of the crises, right. That means a lot of distraction as well, and at the highest levels. And so closer to home, there's a little bit of a lack of attention.
Okay.
No, I do exactly right. That I think both President Obama and President Bush before him, wanted to spend more time on regional issues, and for a variety of reasons, events that they created or events that they had to respond to, that they haven't had that opportunity. It's interesting. Michael described a situation where perhaps the glass is half full and half empty. That's not necessarily bad. That picture has been a lot worse. If you go back.
Some of them
could be better.
But broadly speaking, the developments that have happened in the region have been extraordinarily favorable to the region and consistent with the interests of the United States. The transformative political environment in Mexico, still not entirely end, but a transformative situation in Colombia, as an example, and Chile, Argentina, Brazil,
you mentioned
haltingly going, stepping out beyond their region and beyond their comfort zone.
Right. You mentioned Brazil, and I need a quick answer on this. I mean, the setback in Brazil was due to a blunder, wasn't it, with the NSA spying on the president there?
Obviously, it's a political issue that President Obama is trying to manage with President Youssef. I mean, even going back to when President Lula was in charge of Brazil, there were always going to be areas where Brazil and the United States saw issues the same way, and areas where Brazil and the United States saw things differently. Iran would be a good example of that.
And we are going to have to leave it there. PJ Crowley, Michael Shifter, thanks for joining us. When we come back, the view from Beijing, Brussels, and London. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.